Gentleman's time has expired. I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kanjorski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure that the committee here isn't having this examination to find out whether we could promote the shareholders' interest of Bank of America. That seems to be what you potentially violated. But I'm going to give you an opportunity, since this is your first testimony before the Congress, to be a little more explicit and descriptive of the situation that happened on September 15th, the 18th, and then on October 3rd by act of Congress. Processes were taken so that we can return. You heard my colleagues on the other side seem to suggest that you overreacted, that there was a exaggeration of difficulty, and that in some way abuse of power occurred on behalf of yourself and the President and this Congress in acting precipitously in the fall of '08 in this disaster. Now, we've had the occasion to have Chairman Bernanke before this committee, before the Financial Committee on 3 or 4 times, and I always ask the question of them to make sure we restate that picture and that the American people have a chance to understand what happened. And I dare say, for criticism, I think both yourself and Chairman Bernanke and the new Secretary of Treasury have failed to inform adequately the American people as to what meltdown meant. I remember those vital days and some of those meetings and telephone conference calls that we all participated in, and some of the descriptions. I don't want to provide that testimony, but I'm hoping that maybe you may remember whether questions of law and order were asked, whether questions of the capacity to feed the American people for what period of time were asked. I'm not going to say what I remember the answer to be, but I think when you give the description now, something dire had to be stopped from happening. That's great for you to understand that and those of us that were there, but that doesn't mean a damn thing to the American people. And as we move through this, you can see committee members here don't quite understand what the situation of September, October, November, and December of '08 was like. Right. Please take moments now to describe as fully in detail as you can what were the projections that could happen to not only the United States but the world in a period of 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, and how that would comport to what life would be like if no action were taken.
Congressman, thank you for the question. And one of the issues we dealt with at the time was the more explicit we were, the more graphic we were, the more this would terrify the American people. The more it would terrify the American people and lead to an even greater economic problem. And so we were, as we were attempting to explain this, there was this conflict. We didn't want to overly scare people and make it worse.
Well, now take the opportunity to scare people.
Okay. Well,
tell them the truth. I mean, we've got to deal with the American people now and some of our fellow members who think that this was a facade of some sort, that it didn't really happen, that we weren't in jeopardy.
If you have a situation where a banking system is frozen and money can't move between financial institutions, what ultimately happens is that every business, even businesses that seem to be solid, and small businesses across America will not be able to fund their inventory. They won't be able to meet their payroll. That you will have when a financial system breaks down, the kinds of numbers that we were looking at in terms of unemployment was much greater than the numbers we're looking at now. People in the streets, and of course around the world, it is very significant, because I remember talking with, for instance, German leaders who were explaining to me that people in the old East were unhappy with the big discrepancies in wealth, but they at least believed in the system and believed in some form of market-driven capitalism. But that that if we had a meltdown of the system, it just could even lead. It could lead to chaos, or people even questioning the basic system. And so there was.
Let me put it a little more succinctly, because we are running out of time.
Yeah.
Mr. Paulson, I was in New York the other day, and I had this very discussion with a lot of your former colleagues
Yep.
on Wall Street, and we talked about what could have happened if the President, if yourself, and if the Congress had not taken action. And the one member I remember sitting at the panel described it, that he said that the people that have talked about we would have gone back to the 16th century were being optimistic.
Well, it is. I try not to use hyperbole and explain something that is it's impossible to ever prove now that it didn't happen. But at least I believe, I had, when we had this debate, I had some people say, well, listen, look at everything that's been in place since the Great Depression. We can't have that. You know, we certainly couldn't go through that again. I looked at it the opposite. When I looked at in a world where information can flow, money can move with the speed of light electronically, looked how fast this liquidity went, looked at the ripple effect, and looked at how when a financial system fails, a whole country's economic system can fail. I believe we could have been gone back to the sorts of situations we saw in the Depression. I remember asking Ben Bernanke what he thought the world would look like, and he said, well, just take a look at what happened in the Depression. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that, because I knew it was going to be very bad, and I never wanted to experience very bad. I didn't